Feudalism, created by Jasnady Davis, Naisa Brewer, Joshua Haggerott, Olivia Brathwaite. Feudalism developed after the fall of the Roman Empire and is considered to be an important prerequisite for Western democracy. European feudalism in the Middle Ages was defined by several key characteristics. These included the relationship between lord and vassal, the act of homage, the role of knights, and chivalry. In addition, the feudal system was an important means of organizing European society into a cohesive whole. Understanding these characteristics helped to provide an in-depth awareness of European feudalism and its impact on society in the Middle Ages.
The feudal system structure is a bit complex, but it can basically be broken down into the king was on the top, followed by the nobles, the knights, and finally the peasants. This was nicely summed up in a video I watched on Khan Academy. I've included the picture from Spartacus Educational to show how a country would be broken down into duchies, which is what dukes controlled. So the king would grant land to a duke, and it was a duchy, and then the duke would further break down his duchy into counties, and that's where the count came into play. But it would get somewhat complex because nobles could be king, duke, and an example of this is in the Magna Carta. King John has many titles, to include King of England, Lord of Ireland, Duke of Normandy, and Antiquaint, and Count of Anjou. So this is kind of why the feudal system is a bit complex to map out. When the king would break down his land to give to his nobles, the land would be known as a fief. A fief was usually known as land, but it could also be money. And basically, it's a gift given in exchange for loyalty and service. When a fief was exchanged, it would create this lord-vassal relationship. So the giver would be known as the lord, and the recipient was known as the vassal. And they would promise loyalty or a servant in exchange for whatever the gift was, money or land. I've included this pyramid, a feudal pyramid of power that I found on Pinterest to kind of show what was expected. So it was an exchange relationship. The king would give land to the nobles in return for money and knights. The nobles would give land to the knights in return for protection and military service, and land and protection could be given to peasants in return for food and services. When the king would break down his land, it would be broken down into duchies, which were given to dukes. For the English, dukes was usually a position only reserved for a royal family. Then the dukes would break down their land into counties or shires. Counties is what the French would refer to it as, and that was given to a count. Shires is what the English called it, and it would be given to an earl. And then either of them could appoint knights. The lord position, basically, he gives authority and protects his vassal. And so the king could be a lord, the noble could be a lord, and the vassal is just a subordinate to the lord, the recipient of the fief. When knights were appointed, they were expected to provide a military service and enforce the Lord's rules and carry out the general will of the Lord. Now, this relationship could also be inherited, but it was only inherited for the nobles. Knightship was not something that was generally inherited.
A fief was a piece of land during the medieval times that included at least one village with huts for the serfs, a house or castle for the nobles, and land where they could grow or hunt their food. It was given to a noble by the king, usually as a loan, and could be taken back at any time. Sometimes the reason nobles were given fiefs was due to their bravery during battle. However, other times, before getting one, a noble had to have loyalty towards the king, thus promising to fight for him whenever he needed, providing him with money, and taking care of the serfs working the land. Serfs were a part of the lowest feudal class and were similar to slaves. They were owned by the nobles whose land they lived on and were even required to pay rent on top of working the land, which included growing crops and gathering food to feed themselves and the nobles. They had to do all of these things in exchange for a place to live and for legal and customary rights.
When a fief was accepted, there was a symbolic ceremony called homage. Basically, the vassal would kneel with his hands clasped, and then the Lord would cover the vassal's hands with his own and lift him up. This was symbolic for the Lord provides protection when he covers the hands and elevates when he lifts him up, also showing that he could put back down. Vassal is a Celtic word for boy, and home is a French word for the man, which is why it was called homage, because he would kneel as a boy and come up as the man and authoritative vassal of the Lord. Now, for nobles, this relationship could be inherited. When the relationship was inherited, the heir would have to pay a relief. A relief was a fee that the heir would have to pay to secure possession of the fief. And this was referenced in the Magna Carta, paragraph 2. There was also something known as wardship for minor heirs, and this was in paragraph 3 through 5 of the Magna Carta. Wardship was the right of a feudal lord to the income of a fief during the minority of its heir. The lord would maintain the fief and also care for the material needs of the heir until they became of age, which then the lord was required to release the fief in the same condition that it was received. If the lord did not return the fief in the same condition, the Magna Carta stipulated that the lord would have to pay a fine for returning it in a lesser condition. And when this wardship relationship happened, the heir would not be responsible for paying the relief fee. And upon coming of age, when the heir received the fief, he would also again do an act of homage to renew the lord-vassal relationship. This picture I have included here is from Pinterest, and the definitions that I used were for Hamyok Castle medieval terms.
Role of knights was not only to protect the lord's land, but also provided military service. In the early Middle Ages, a knight usually was a person born wealthy from a noble family. It changed an emergence of feudalism. A successful, courageous soldier could become a knight and wealthy regardless of their background. A knight was trained in horsemanship, chivalry, and a range of weapons. In exchange for their service, the lords provided lodging, armor, weapons, horses, and fiefs, which at that time was the land. A knight rewarded with a fief had to pledge his military service, which was called feudal levy. In other words, they were required to fight a minimum of 40 days. Knights were also able to bring more wealth by participating in jousting tournaments, which at the time served as training grounds for the knights. Chivalry, a knight's code of ethic. Being a knight was a special military force with their own moral system. They established a code of ethics, a code that they honored and respected. They demonstrated honesty, fairness in battle, faithfulness and loyalty, treated women properly, sacrificed himself for the king and the kingdom. A great example was referenced in the Song of Roland. As in the textbook, it states that the Song of Roland was a process that transformed the meaning of chivalry from horsemanship to something more refined. Roland was exemplified as a perfect soldier and Christian. Charlemagne, his uncle, cried out, "My friend, my Roland, God guard thy soul. Never on earth such a knight hath been, field of battle to fight and win. My pride and glory, alas, are gone." He was loyal, courageous, and despite his errors, he was a model knight. As we conclude, the Middle Ages was characterized by a lack of technological and societal progress. However, the feudal system was an important means of providing order during an otherwise turbulent time. The feudal system was defined by the relationship between lord and vassal and the act of homage and the role of knights and chivalry. These characteristics formed after the fall of the Roman Empire and served as a prerequisite to Western democracy.